Judge Osborne's got quite a difficult position. He's got to deal with the deficit. We're borrowing too much money, so he needs to both raise money and cut spending. But he also needs to deal with the productivity problem. Britain's falling behind its competitors in production per hour for each member of its workforce. So he's dealing with this with a number of angles. He's attacking the productivity problem by imposing a much higher minimum wage. It's giving a hike of more than 10% starting on the 6th of April next year, and it's then going to rise by a locked-in more than 6% for each of the next 5 years. With inflation running at less than 2%, that's a real wage increase for many members of society of 4, 5, 6% for half a decade. People haven't seen that kind of pay rise for years, if ever. So that's going to be putting quite a burden on companies to generate the profits to be able to pay that increasing living wage. They're going to be able to do that in part because he's helping them invest. He's giving them an increased annual investment allowance. That's going to be set at £200,000 a year, which will be more than enough for most of the small businesses, which is where most job creation comes from, for their investment. He's also helping them by reducing the corporation tax burden. We've already got a very low corporation tax rate. At 20%, it's the lowest in the G7, but he's dropping that to 19% and then to 18% by 2020. So again, he's allowing companies to have more of the cash that they make from their sales retained in the business, which will help them pay for the living wage.
One of the big surprises that came out of the budget was the Chancellor's announcement that he's going to reform the taxation of dividends. For some time he's wanted to tackle the advantage that people who own their companies can have in taking their income as dividends rather than salary, but without upsetting the large number of investors who rely on dividend income to fund themselves. And he's finally come up with a cunning plan to do that. And what he's going to do is, from April 2016, he's going to abolish the tax credit that we currently have on dividends and replace that with a fixed £5,000 tax-free allowance for dividends. So for your smaller investors, that's fine. Probably the bulk of their dividends will now be tax-free. And when you add that £5,000 onto the personal allowance, it means you can have £16,000 worth of income if you structure your finances correctly without paying any tax on it. For people who own their own companies and take their income as dividends, it will be a little bit different. Most of those are going to see their tax bills increase, but I think not to an extent that will actually change their behaviours. For virtually all of those people, it will still be more tax efficient to take dividends rather than salary. And just to take an example of that, if you look at somebody who's taking around £40,000 a year as dividend, they're going to end up paying tax of something like £1,600 a year more under the new rules, but they'll still be around £5,000 a year better off than they would be if they'd taken salary. So the Chancellor has managed to introduce some rules that will increase the tax take, but will still give that benefit to company owners in taking dividends rather than salary. In terms of inheritance tax, this was the Chancellor's big crowd pleaser from the election. For a long time he's been promising us £1 million tax exemption for couples, and he's now decided to deliver that, but in a rather convoluted and phased way. This has been triggered by the fact that we've seen a lot of fiscal creep with inheritance tax over recent years, mainly fueled by house price increases, combined with the fact that the inheritance tax nil rate band has been frozen at £325,000 since 2009. So in 2010, around 2.5% of estates paid inheritance tax. Last year that was up at about 6.5%, and it's set to go beyond 11% by 2019 unless he does something about it. So what he's decided to do is rather than increasing the nil rate band, he's going to introduce a new family home allowance, which will start at £100,000 per person in 2017 and then will increase to £175,000 per person in 2020. So if you add up two lots of £325,000 and two lots of £175,000, that will give you your £1 million for a married couple. There are some conditions attaching to it though, and it's a little bit more restricted than we hoped it would be. It will only apply to people who are passing on their main family home. So we haven't seen a precise definition of that, but it looks like that you'll be able to, if you've got more than one home, you'll be able to choose which one of them it is, as long as it has been your home at some point. It will only apply though if you're passing that on to your direct lineal descendants, so if you're passing it to your children and grandchildren. If you don't have children and you're passing it to nieces and nephews, then you won't get this allowance. Some good news that was causing an issue that was causing some concerns beforehand was that what would happen if somebody had downsized or perhaps sold their home to provide costing fees for care home. And what he's introducing now is a provision that if you have downsized and you've still got the value of the house in your estate in the form of other assets, you can still have this allowance. So that's good news for people who still want that flexibility in planning for their retirement. It is very much targeted at Middle England though. Anybody whose estate is worth more than £2 million will start to see the allowance disappear. So by the time you get to estates worth 2.35 million, it will have disappeared altogether. So overall it's a welcome introduction, but I think with all tax changes there will be some winners and some losers.